Imagine your child standing before you, tears streaming down their face after breaking a rule. Maybe they hit their sibling or refuse to do their homework again. You feel your patience slipping, and almost instinctively, you hear the words escape your mouth, "If you don't stop, no TV tonight." Or maybe, when they finally apologize, you reward them with a smile and a "good job." But have you ever wondered what your child really hears in those moments? Behind the praise, the punishment, and the good intentions, the hidden message often becomes, "I love you when you behave the way I want you to." That's the very heart of the problem Alfie Kohn uncovers in Unconditional Parenting, moving from rewards and punishments to love and reason. It's a book that challenges almost everything we've been taught about raising good kids. Kohn asks us to look beyond behavior, beyond the stickers, timeouts, and gold stars, to see what truly shapes our children's hearts. He offers something both radical and deeply comforting, the idea that our children don't need to earn our love. They need to feel it, always. Unconditionally. In this summary, we'll walk through Kohn's ideas, exploring what it really means to parent without conditions. You'll see why rewards and punishments, even gentle ones, can backfire. You'll learn how to guide instead of control, how to connect instead of coerce, and how to raise children who act kindly not because they fear consequences, but because they want to. If you've ever felt exhausted by the cycle of yelling, bribing, or fixing your child's behavior, this message is for you. Kohn's approach offers a gentler, more effective way, one that restores peace not only to your child but to your own heart as a parent. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Kohn starts by challenging the invisible rulebook of modern parenting. Most of us, he says, were raised in a system of conditional love. We were praised when we did what our parents liked, punished or withdrawn from when we didn't. Even the most loving parents often use the same framework, because it seems to work. After all, rewards make kids behave better, right? And punishments teach consequences. But Kohn argues that what seems to work in the short term often fails in the long run. Sure, a child might clean their room faster when you dangle dessert or threaten to take away their phone. But what happens inside that child over time is far more concerning. They begin to connect love and approval to performance. They learn that to be good is to please others. And when no one is watching, or when life gets harder, they lose the internal motivation to do right, because all their focus has been on avoiding disapproval or chasing praise. He asks us to picture a child who paints a picture just to earn a gold star, instead of painting because they love colors. A child who helps their sibling only to be praised, instead of because empathy feels good, is the quiet harm of conditional parenting. It replaces inner growth with outer control. To make his point clear, Kohn uses examples every parent recognizes. Think of the familiar timeout. On the surface, it's harmless, just a quiet break after misbehavior. But look deeper, what message does a child hear? You're welcome here when you act right. When you don't, you're alone. The lesson isn't about reflection or growth. It's about compliance. The same goes for praise. We think saying, "good job," builds confidence. But often, it builds dependency. A child praised too often begins to look outward for validation, constantly wondering, "Did I do well enough?" Kohn isn't saying we shouldn't encourage our kids, far from it. He's saying there's a world of difference between encouragement and evaluation. Saying, "I loved watching you paint, you looked so focused," acknowledges effort and connection. Saying, "That's such a beautiful painting, you're so talented," judges the product. One builds confidence from within, the other makes it conditional. Kohn's message is simple yet profound. The goal of parenting isn't to produce obedient children, but to raise compassionate, self-aware, internally motivated people. And that means love and guidance that do not depend on behavior. He tells the story of a mother who came to him exhausted from battling her son's tantrums. Every strategy, punishments, reward charts, even praise, worked for a while but always failed. Through reflection, she realized that what her son craved most wasn't control or consequence, it was connection. When she began to respond with empathy first, sitting with him during outbursts instead of isolating him, his behavior softened. Their bond grew. He still had meltdowns sometimes, but now they worked through them together instead of against each other. That, Kohn says, is the essence of unconditional parenting, staying close even when your child struggles, especially when they're at their hardest to love. He also challenges the cultural obsession with discipline. The word itself, he reminds us, comes from the Latin disciplina, meaning to teach, not to punish. But somewhere along the way, discipline became synonymous with control. Kohn wants us to reclaim its true meaning, guiding with love and reason rather than fear. Parenting this way can feel unfamiliar at first. Many of us were raised to believe that children must learn lessons through discomfort, that tough love builds character. But as Kohn gently points out, love that feels conditional isn't love that heals, it's love that divides. And no lesson learned through fear ever grows into parenting as a long conversation, one where every interaction tells our child something about who they are and how love works. If they learn that love disappears when they make mistakes, they'll grow cautious, anxious, and perfectionistic. But if they learn that love stays, no matter what, they'll grow secure, brave, and kind. In this first part of the book, Kohn's message is both challenging and freeing. It asks us to look inward, to notice when we're tempted to control, when we equate compliance with goodness, and when our fear of losing control makes us act harshly. He doesn't shame us for it, he understands where it comes from. Most of us were parented that way ourselves. But he offers hope, that by changing how we relate to our children, we can break that cycle and raise a generation that feels deeply loved, not just well-behaved. And as Kohn transitions into the next part of his work, he begins to show us exactly how. He moves from what's wrong with traditional parenting to what's possible instead, how we can guide, connect, and teach with unconditional love at the center of everything. Chapter 2. After helping us see how much of modern parenting is built on control, Alfie Kohn turns our attention to the invisible damage that control leaves behind, and what happens when we choose to lead with connection instead. He begins by asking a simple but uncomfortable question: why do we feel such a strong need to control our children? Most of us, Kohn says, don't wake up in the morning thinking, I want to dominate my kids today. We love them. We want what's best for them. But we live in a culture that equates control with competence, where being a good parent often means keeping children in line. We're told that our authority defines our success. That if our child is calm, polite, and compliant, we must be doing something right. But Kohn invites us to look beneath the surface. Control might make things look peaceful in the moment, but it often creates tension just below it. A child might obey because they fear consequences, not because they understand or agree. And every time they're forced into compliance, a small fracture forms in the trust between parent and child. He shares stories of children who seemed well-behaved, but later struggled with anxiety, perfectionism, or resentment. These weren't problem kids. They were children who had learned that love and approval depended on performance. They had learned to look outward for direction instead of inward for values. Kohn reminds us that control-based parenting, even in its gentlest forms, sends a message: you are loved when you do what I want. And children absorb that message deeply. They may not say it, but they feel it, in the pause before a parent smiles, in the sigh after a disobedient moment, in the way affection feels just a little out of reach when they've made a mistake. This creates what psychologists call conditional self-worth. These children grow up measuring their value by others' approval, by teachers, friends, bosses, partners. And when they fail or disappoint, they feel not just guilt, but shame. Because deep down, they learn that being good was the price of being loved. One of the most moving parts of this chapter is how Kohn helps parents see that control doesn't only come in harsh forms. It can hide behind praise, structure, and guidance. For instance, we might say, "I'm so proud of you for sharing your toys." It sounds kind, but what if the message underneath is, "I'm proud of you when you share, not necessarily when you don't." Even positive reinforcement, when used to manipulate behavior, becomes another form of control. Kohn isn't saying we should never express pride or joy in our children. What he asks us to do is check our intention. Are we celebrating them for who they are, or rewarding them for doing what we prefer? To illustrate, he describes a mother who always praised her daughter for getting good grades. The girl thrived, until one semester, she struggled in math and brought home a C. Her mother comforted her but also said, "You'll do better next time, I know you will." The words seemed supportive, but the daughter's takeaway was, "I'm only valuable when I succeed." Years later, she confessed that she began to hide her failures because she couldn't bear to lose her mother's approval. The real goal, Kohn explains, is not to control behavior but to understand it. When a child lies, refuses, or acts out, instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" we should ask, "What's driving this behavior?" Maybe the child is scared, tired, disconnected, or overwhelmed. Every behavior is communication. And when parents respond with curiosity rather than control, trust begins to grow. He gives an example of a little boy who often hit his sister. His parents tried everything, punishment, rewards, even taking away his favorite toys, but nothing worked. When they finally slowed down and asked what was happening, they discovered he felt left out whenever his parents spent time with his sister. Once they began scheduling small moments of one-on-one time with him, the hitting stopped. The problem wasn't aggression, it was loneliness. And it wasn't solved by control, but by connection. Kohn also explores how fear drives control. Parents often fear that if they don't stay on top of their kids, they'll grow up spoiled, entitled, or disrespectful. But he points out something ironic: it's the most controlled children who often rebel the hardest. The tighter we grip, the more they pull away, because control stifles the natural development to think long-term. Our goal isn't to raise obedient children, it's to raise thoughtful, self-aware adults. Obedience might make parenting easier today, but it can make adulthood harder tomorrow. The child who's always been told what to do struggles later to make their own choices, to say no, or to think critically. They've learned to follow, not to reason. One of Kohn's most powerful lines in this section is simple: the way children learn to make good decisions is by making decisions, not by following directions. When we allow kids to participate in problem solving, even when they mess up, we're giving them practice for life. He describes a family who transformed their home by replacing control with collaboration. Instead of laying down strict rules, they began having weekly family meetings. Everyone, including the children, could discuss problems and suggest solutions. At first, the parents worried this would lead to chaos. But what they discovered was remarkable: when children felt heard, they became more cooperative. When they helped create the rules, they were more likely to follow them. This is the essence of Kohn's philosophy, shifting from power over children to power with them. It's not about being permissive or letting them run wild. It's about sharing responsibility, building trust, and treating children as partners in learning how to live well together. By the end of this chapter, a pattern begins to emerge: everything that makes parenting peaceful and sustainable starts with relationship, not control. We can't punish a child into empathy or bribe them into self-respect. But we can model those qualities through the way we love them. As Kohn transitions into the next part of his book, he builds on this truth, showing parents how to replace control-based strategies with connection-based ones. He offers real ways to guide behavior through empathy, reasoning, and shared problem-solving, a way of parenting that not only changes children but also transforms us. Chapter 3. At first, this idea can feel almost shocking. Most of us grew up believing that praise is the heartbeat of good parenting, that a good job, or a gold star boosts confidence, encourages good behavior, and strengthens connection. But Kohn asks a disarming question: if rewards really work, why do we have to keep using them over and over again? He invites us to look closer. Imagine your child cleans their room, and you say, "Wow, I'm so proud of you." It feels right, warm, loving, positive. But beneath that surface, a subtle message slips through: "I approve of you because you did something I like." Over time, children begin to associate our affection with performance. They learn to chase praise rather than to develop their own internal kindness or appreciation are wrong. What he's asking us to notice is our intention. Are we praising to celebrate, or to control? Are we expressing joy, or are we managing behavior? That difference, he explains, changes everything. He tells a story of a little girl who loved drawing. At first, she would sit for hours, lost in her world of color and imagination. Then one day, her parents began praising every picture. "That's beautiful. You're such an artist." Before long, her drawings started to change. She began to glance up after each stroke, waiting for approval. Eventually, she stopped drawing unless someone was watching. The pure joy had been replaced by performance anxiety. What happened here, Kohn explains, is that the intrinsic motivation, the natural pleasure of doing something for its own sake, was replaced by extrinsic motivation, the desire for a reward. The same pattern shows up everywhere: the child who reads only for stickers, who helps only for praise, who behaves only for treats. The reward system might get short-term compliance, but it weakens long-term character. Parents often ask Kohn, "But isn't it better to use praise than punishment?" His answer is both gentle and clear: they're two sides of the same coin. Both manipulate behavior. Both send the message that love and approval depend on performance. The difference is that one uses sweetness while the other uses fear, but both are conditional. He encourages parents to replace praise with presence. Instead of judging or evaluating, simply notice. When your child builds something, instead of saying, "Good job, try, you worked really hard on that," or, "I can see how proud you feel," these statements connect your child to their own sense of satisfaction. They teach reflection rather than dependence. Kohn even points out how some phrases, though well-meaning, can subtly erode trust. "I'm proud of you" seems loving, but it still centers the parent's approval. "You must be proud of yourself" centers the child's. The difference might seem small, but to a growing mind, it's enormous. Kohn isn't saying that kindness or appreciation are wrong. What he's asking us to notice is our intention. Are we praising to celebrate, or to control? Are we expressing joy, or are we managing behavior? That difference, he explains, changes everything. He tells a story of a little girl who loved drawing. At first, she would sit for hours, lost in her world of color and imagination. Then one day, her parents began praising every picture. "That's beautiful. You're such an artist." Before long, her drawings started to change. She began to glance up after each stroke, waiting for approval. Eventually, she stopped drawing unless someone was watching. The pure joy had been replaced by performance anxiety. Kohn explains, is that the intrinsic motivation, the natural pleasure of doing something for its own sake, was replaced by extrinsic motivation, the desire for a reward. The same pattern shows up everywhere: the child who reads only for stickers, who helps only for praise, who behaves only for treats. The reward system might get short-term compliance, but it weakens long-term character. Parents often ask Kohn, "But isn't it better to use praise than punishment?" His answer is both gentle and clear: they're two sides of the same coin. Both manipulate behavior. Both send the message that love and approval depend on performance. The difference is that one uses sweetness while the other uses fear, but both are conditional. He encourages parents to replace praise with presence. Instead of judging or evaluating, simply notice. When your child builds something, instead of saying, "Good job, try, you worked really hard on that," or, "I can see how proud you feel," these statements connect your child to their own sense of satisfaction. They teach reflection rather than dependence. Kohn even points out how some phrases, though well-meaning, can subtly erode trust. "I'm proud of you" seems loving, but it still centers the parent's approval. "You must be proud of yourself" centers the child's. The difference might seem small, but to a growing mind, it's enormous. One mother he worked with decided to test this idea. Her 6-year-old son had been praised endlessly for good manners. "You're such a good boy," she'd often say. But Kohn encouraged her to shift from evaluation to empathy. The next time he shared his snack with a friend, she said, "That was kind of you. How did it make you feel to share?" To her surprise, he smiled and said, "It made me happy." Over time, his kindness became more natural, less performative. He wasn't sharing to earn approval anymore, he was doing it because he understood kindness from the inside out. Kohn explains that rewards and punishments work by manipulating what children do. But unconditional parenting focuses on what children think and feel. Instead of changing behavior from the outside, it nurtures motivation from the inside. He shares another powerful example of a family that decided to drop their reward chart. Their daughter, who had always loved reading, had begun reading only for stickers. When the chart came down, her interest vanished for a while, the external motivator was gone. But gradually, she rediscovered the simple joy of stories. The mother described it like this: "It was like watching her find herself again." The lesson here is profound. Every time we use rewards to make children behave, we teach them to look outside themselves for meaning. But when we guide them with empathy, we teach them to look inward, to develop conscience, curiosity, and compassion that last long after the sticker chart. This shift can be. Many parents feel that without praise or rewards, they'll have no tools left. But he reassures us that love, attention, and connection are not passive tools, they are transformative ones. A warm glance, a shared laugh, a gentle word of understanding, these shape a child far more deeply than any gold star ever could. By the end of this chapter, Kohn paints a picture of what family life can look like when praise gives way to partnership. A home where children are free to make mistakes without fear of losing love. Where parents don't play the role of judges but companions on a shared journey of growth. Where children's motivation grows not from wanting to please, but from wanting to live well. And with this understanding in place, Kohn takes us to the next level. If rewards and punishments both fail, how can we actually help children grow, learn, and make better choices? In the next chapter, he explores what guidance looks like in practice, the art of leading with empathy and helping children learn through connection, not correction. Chapter 4. As parents, we often find ourselves standing at a crossroads in moments of conflict. Our child refuses to share, talks back, or hits a sibling, and we wonder, what should I do? The reflex is almost automatic: we lecture, punish, threaten, or withdraw something they value. But Kohn asks us to pause and consider a deeper question: what is my goal right now? If the goal is short-term obedience, then punishment or bribery will get the job done, for a while. But if the goal is long-term growth, emotional maturity, and self-awareness, then we need a different path altogether. Kohn reminds us that discipline, at its root, means to teach. Yet in modern parenting, discipline has become a synonym for control, a way to stop unwanted behavior, not to understand it. He urges us to return to the original meaning, guiding a child toward understanding themselves and the impact of their actions. He begins this chapter with a story of a little boy named Ethan who was struggling in school. He often shouted at classmates and refused to listen to his teacher. His parents, desperate to help, began taking away privileges every time he misbehaved: no screen time, no dessert, no playdates. It seemed logical: bad behavior equals consequence. But nothing changed. In fact, things got worse. Ethan grew angrier, more withdrawn, and eventually started saying things like, "You don't love me when I'm bad." When his parents met with Kohn, he gently pointed out the message hidden in their system: you are loved when you behave. When you don't, love is withheld. That realization broke their hearts. From that moment, they shifted from punishing to connecting. Instead of focusing on the behavior, they started focusing on the need behind the behavior. When Ethan yelled, they asked what he was feeling. When he made a mistake, they stayed close instead of sending him away. We live in a culture obsessed with doing, with results, with milestones, with getting ahead. And naturally, that mindset seeps into how we parent. We rush from one enrichment class to another, pile on activities, and praise every good grade as proof of worth. But amid all the noise, something precious gets lost, the simple experience of being loved for who you are. He tells a story about a mother who came to him exhausted. Her 8-year-old son had a packed schedule, piano lessons, soccer practice, extra reading sessions, all in the name of helping him reach his potential. But despite all her efforts, the boy had grown withdrawn and anxious. When Kohn asked what the boy loved doing most, the mother paused. Then, with a sad smile, she said, "He loves climbing trees. But we had to stop because there wasn't time." That one line, "there wasn't time," captures the heart of what Kohn calls conditional living. When every day is about being better, faster, smarter, love begins to sound like a report card. He urges parents to create what he calls a slow home, not a silent or unambitious one, but a space where children can breathe, explore, and make mistakes without fear. This doesn't mean eliminating structure. It means filling the structure with compassion instead of pressure. It's the difference between saying, "You have to finish this so you don't fall behind," and saying, "Let's take this one step at a time. I'm here with you." In this chapter, Kohn also dives into how language shapes love. Simple words, often said in a rush or habit, can deeply affect how children see themselves. Phrases like, "Good boy, I'm proud of you," or "You make me so happy when you behave," sound harmless, but they carry a message: love is something you earn. Instead, Kohn suggests we use language that recognizes effort, not worth, that celebrates being, not performing. For instance, rather than, "I'm proud of you," we can say, "You worked really hard on that," or "I love watching you figure things out." This isn't about removing praise altogether. It's about shifting from conditional approval to attentive presence. When we see and affirm our children without judgment, they stop striving to please, and start growing with confidence. Another key part of this chapter explores routines and rituals. Kohn notes that the structure of our daily lives can communicate unconditional love just as powerfully as our words. When dinner time is predictable, when bedtime is calm, when family rituals, even simple ones like reading together or taking a walk, are consistent, children feel safe. They learn that love doesn't depend on performance, it lives in the rhythm of connection. His behavior changed, not because he feared losing love, but because he trusted it was always there. Kohn explains that guidance grounded in unconditional love looks very different from control. It begins with empathy, seeing a child's actions as communication. A tantrum might not be defiance but frustration. A lie might not be deceit but fear. A refusal might not be disrespect but a plea for autonomy. When we look beneath the behavior, we often find emotions that need understanding, not punishment. He also shows how children learn best when they feel emotionally safe. Fear shuts down the brain's learning centers, love opens them. When kids trust that they won't be shamed for mistakes, they become curious about how to do better. They start to ask, "What happened?" instead of, "What's wrong with me?" Kohn introduces the idea of collaborative problem solving, a simple but powerful shift from, "Do what I say," to, "Let's figure this out together." It's about sitting beside a child rather than standing above them. Instead of saying, "You hit your brother, go to your room," we might say, "You were upset. Let's talk about what happened. What can we do next time?" One mother shared that after years of power struggles with her daughter, she began using this approach. When her daughter refused to clean up her toys, instead of scolding, she asked, "What's making it hard for you to clean up right now?" Her daughter sighed and said, "I'm tired. I'll do it after snack." The mom agreed, and to her surprise, her daughter kept her word. What could have been a battle turned into cooperation, all because she chose curiosity over control. Kohn points out that collaborative guidance doesn't mean letting kids get away with things. It means helping them understand the why behind their actions, and the how of making amends. When a child hits, we can focus not on punishment but on repair. "You hurt your brother. Let's help him feel better. What can we do?" This approach teaches empathy directly. Throughout this chapter, Kohn dismantles the myth that being kind and being firm are opposites. True guidance, he says, is both. You can be gentle and still have boundaries. The key difference is how those boundaries are set, through relationship, not power. He describes boundaries as fences, not walls. They protect, guide, and teach, but they don't isolate or shame. When children understand that rules exist to keep them and others safe, not to control them, they internalize those rules. Parents to reflect on how often our need for control comes from our own fears. Fear of judgment from others. Fear of losing authority. Fear that if we don't crack down, our kids will spiral. But when fear drives our parenting, children feel it, and respond with resistance or fear of their own. He tells the story of a father who used to yell whenever his son ignored instructions. After reflecting on Kohn's message, the father realized his shouting wasn't about the child's behavior, it was about his own anxiety. He feared that if his son didn't learn obedience now, he'd grow up disrespectful. But once he began replacing fear with faith, trusting his son's goodness and his own calm leadership, their relationship changed. They talked more, fought less, and the boy became more responsible, not less. Kohn calls this the paradox of unconditional guidance. When you stop trying to control your child, you gain more influence. Because influence flows from trust, not fear. By the end of this chapter, Kohn has built a clear vision of what real teaching looks like. When we guide without control, children learn to guide themselves. When we listen instead of lecture, they learn to listen too. When we stay close in their worst moments, they learn that love isn't something that can be lost. This doesn't mean parenting becomes perfect or peaceful overnight. It means our focus shifts from fixing our children to understanding them, and that shift changes everything. As Kohn moves forward, he takes this principle even deeper. He begins to show parents how the home environment, language, and everyday interactions can either nurture or undermine unconditional love, how every small choice we make shapes how our children feel about themselves and about love. Chapter 5. Kohn begins this part of the journey with a tender observation: children don't just listen to what we say, they feel who we are. The tone of our voice, the pace of our days, the number of shoulds that fill our home, all of it sends silent messages about what matters most. And too often, without even realizing it, we end up teaching our kids that love is tied to achievement, performance, or compliance. He asks parents to look around their homes for a moment, at the walls covered in reward charts, the fridge full of gold stars, the busy schedules pinned to corkboards. He doesn't ask us to feel guilty. Instead, he invites reflection. What story do these things tell about childhood? Is it a story about joy, discovery, connection? Or is it a story about measurement, improvement, and a father who used to check his phone constantly during his daughter's bedtime routine? She never complained, but one night she said quietly, "Daddy, I think your phone loves you more than me." It was a wake-up call. From then on, the father made bedtime sacred: no screens, no rush, just stories and laughter. The difference, he said, wasn't just in his daughter's sleep, but in their closeness. She began to talk more, worry less, and look forward to that moment each night. Kohn reminds us that love is communicated through attention, not the big, dramatic gestures, but the small, steady acts of presence. When we put away distractions, when we listen without judgment, when we let a child finish their thought without correcting them, we're saying, "You matter to me. You don't have to earn my attention." He also encourages parents to create space for imperfection. Our homes don't have to be organized around constant success. Kids can have messy rooms, unstructured afternoons, and even moments of boredom, because boredom is not the enemy, it's the birthplace of creativity. In one of the most touching parts of the chapter, Kohn shares how parents who slow down and simplify often discover their children anew. They notice the quirks, the quiet joys, the spontaneous humor that get buried under busyness. One mother told him, "I realized I didn't really know my son. I knew his schedule, his grades, his preferences, but not him. Once we slowed down, I started seeing who he really is." By the end of chapter 5, Kohn paints a picture of parenting that feels both radical and deeply human. It's not about adding more rules, more rewards, more lessons. It's about subtracting what doesn't serve love. Simplifying the noise so the voice of connection can be heard again. He gently closes this part by reminding us that unconditional parenting isn't about perfection, it's about presence. Every day, every interaction, is an opportunity to show our children, you are loved. Right now. Just as you are. And as we move forward, Kohn begins to explore how this mindset can guide not only how we live at home but also how we navigate challenges, how to stay grounded and compassionate even when emotions run high and behavior spirals out of control. Because unconditional parenting isn't tested when things go smoothly, it's revealed when they don't. Chapter 6. This chapter begins with a simple but striking truth: the moments that test our patience the most are also the moments that teach our children the most about love. Kohn invites us to picture the scene we all know too well, the tantrum in the grocery store, the doors slam after a no, the sudden burst of anger over something that seems so small. In those moments, most of us instinctively react with power, control, or even shame, not because we don't love our kids, but because we've been taught that discipline means showing authority. What if real discipline is not about power, but connection? What if the goal isn't to make our children obedient, but to help them understand themselves, and trust that we are their safe place, even when they make mistakes? He paints a familiar picture. A mother is trying to get her son ready for school. He refuses to put on his shoes, screams when she insists, and throws them across the room. Frustrated, she snaps, "That's it. No TV for a week." Instantly, the boy cries harder. The mom feels guilty, she didn't want to yell. But she also feels trapped. What else can she do? Kohn explains that this cycle, behavior, punishment, guilt, is deeply ingrained in modern parenting. We think that without consequences, kids will never learn. But he challenges that assumption with decades of psychological research showing that punishment doesn't teach why something is wrong. It teaches fear, fear of losing love, attention, or privilege. And fear may stop the behavior temporarily, but it doesn't create understanding. Instead, Kohn encourages what he calls collaborative problem solving. When a child acts out, he suggests pausing, breathing, and asking, "What's really going on here?" Because every outburst has a reason beneath it: tiredness, hunger, frustration, disappointment, confusion, or even an unmet need for control or independence. When we respond to the cause, not just the behavior, we help children build emotional awareness, the ability to name and regulate their feelings. For example, in that shoe-throwing scene, the mother might later say, "It seems like you were upset about getting ready this morning. Can you tell me what was hard?" The child might reply, "You kept rushing me, and I didn't like it." That opens a conversation, one that builds trust and teaches both sides something valuable. Of course, this doesn't mean letting every behavior slide. Kohn is clear: boundaries are still essential. But they should be built with empathy, not control. A parent might still say, "Throwing shoes isn't okay, because it could hurt someone," but then add, "Let's figure out another way to tell me when you're frustrated." That "let's" is the bridge, the difference between punishment and partnership. He reminds us that when children act out, what they need most is not punishment but connection. They need to feel seen, not shamed. Because shame makes children hide, love makes them open. When a parent says, "I can see you're having a hard time," instead of, "What's wrong with you?" they create safety, and in that safety, learning happens naturally. In this chapter addressing our emotions as parents. He knows how hard it is to stay calm when everything in us wants to react. He talks about how our own childhood experiences can echo in these moments, how we may unconsciously repeat the patterns we grew up with. Perhaps we were yelled at, ignored, or punished when we misbehaved. Without awareness, we pass that pain forward. He shares the story of a father who was raised by a strict, distant dad. When his own daughter defied him, he felt a surge of anger and fear, the same emotions he'd felt as a boy. But instead of shouting, he paused and whispered to himself, "She's not me. I can do this differently." That pause, Kohn says, is where healing begins. Because parenting doesn't just shape children, it transforms parents too. Throughout this chapter, Kohn emphasizes that unconditional parenting doesn't mean permissive parenting. It's not about saying yes to everything or letting go of limits. It's about why and how we set those limits. When boundaries come from love and reason rather than control, children internalize values rather than simply comply. They do the right thing not because they fear punishment, but because they understand it's right. He offers a reflection every parent can hold on to: when your child is at their worst, that's when they need your love the most. It's easy to love a calm, smiling child. The real challenge, and the real beauty, is loving them through their storms. Kohn also talks about repair, the power of coming back after a hard moment. When we lose our temper or handle a situation poorly, we can still model accountability by apologizing. Saying, "I was upset earlier and I shouldn't have yelled. I'm sorry," doesn't weaken our authority. It strengthens connection. It shows children that adults are human too, and that relationships can heal after conflict. As we move through this chapter, Kohn draws a touching picture of what parenting looks like when love is unconditional even in chaos. It looks like a parent kneeling beside a crying child, saying softly, "You're safe. Let's take a breath together." It looks like a home where mistakes are not met with fear, but with curiosity. It looks like evenings spent talking, not punishing. By the end of chapter 6, the message is simple yet profound: children don't need perfect parents, they need present ones. When we stay with them through their struggles instead of against them, we teach the most powerful lesson of all, that love is steady, even when life isn't. And as Kohn transitions into the later chapters, he begins to show how unconditional parenting isn't just a philosophy for difficult moments, it's a way of life. A lens that changes how we celebrate, teach, and grow together as families. It's about redefining success, not as compliance or achievement, but as connection, resilience, and joy. In this chapter, Kohn shines a gentle light on something so common in modern parenting that we hardly even question it anymore: praise. "Good job. I'm so proud of you. You're such a good boy." These words pour out of parents with love and good intentions. They're meant to encourage, to show approval, to celebrate effort. But Kohn asks a profound and unsettling question: what if our praise, like our punishments, also comes with invisible strings attached? He begins by painting a familiar picture: a little girl runs to her mother holding a drawing. It's messy, colorful, full of imagination. The mom looks and smiles, saying, "Oh wow, that's so beautiful. You're such a talented artist." The girl beams. But then something small happens. The next day, she draws again, but this time she glances up as she colors, checking her mother's face for approval. The joy has subtly shifted. What was once an act of creation has now become an act of performance. This, Kohn explains, is the quiet danger of praise. When children are constantly evaluated, even positively, they start doing things for the praise, not for the love of doing them. The why behind their behavior changes. Instead of asking, "What do I want to create, explore, or learn?" they begin asking, "Will mom or dad like this? Will I get a smile, a clap, a sticker, a reward?" Kohn isn't saying that we should never praise our children. He's saying that when praise becomes a habit, when it's the primary way we communicate approval, it can make love feel conditional. It can make children feel that they are valuable because they please us, rather than simply because they exist. He describes how, in classrooms and homes alike, praise and rewards can easily become another form of control. When we say, "Good job," too automatically, it sends the message, "I'm evaluating you." The focus shifts from the child's internal sense of satisfaction to our external approval. Over time, this can lead children to depend on validation to feel good about themselves, a pattern that can persist well into adulthood. Kohn encourages parents to replace praise with presence. Instead of evaluating what our children do, we can simply notice, describe, or engage with it. If a child shows you a drawing, instead of, "That's beautiful," we can say, "You used so many colors, tell me about this part." That kind of response communicates interest rather than judgment. It tells the child, "I see you. I care about your process, not just the product. Of a dad who decided to experiment with less praise and more curiosity. When his son showed him a Lego tower, instead of saying, "That's awesome," he said, "You worked really hard on that. What made you decide to build it that way?" The boy smiled and said, "Because I wanted to see if I could make it taller than yesterday." The dad later said that was the first time he really heard his son talk about his thinking. Praise, he realized, had been cutting off those deeper moments of connection. Kohn explains that what children need isn't constant affirmation, but unconditional acceptance. They need to know that their worth doesn't rise and fall based on their achievements or how much we approve. When we celebrate effort, curiosity, kindness, creativity, and the simple joy of trying, without measuring or comparing, we help them build intrinsic motivation. They start doing things because it feels good to grow, not because someone is watching. He also challenges one of the most common cultural habits, telling kids we're proud of them. "I'm proud of you" sounds loving, but Kohn invites parents to look deeper. Who is the statement really about? I am proud. It subtly centers the parent's judgment. A child might start thinking, "I want to make mom proud," instead of, "I feel proud of what I accomplished." It teaches children to seek approval instead of self-awareness. He offers a beautiful alternative: help children reflect on their own feelings and sense of growth. After a recital, instead of saying, "I'm proud of you," try, "You must feel proud of yourself. How did it feel to perform?" That shift gives ownership back to the child. It helps them internalize their sense of worth instead of outsourcing it. Kohn also dives into rewards, sticker charts, treats, points, extra screen time for good behavior. He calls these sugar-coated control. They may work in the short term, but they teach children that the reason to behave, share, or learn is to get something. And once the rewards stop, so does the motivation. More importantly, rewards can erode the natural joy of kindness and effort. A child praised for sharing might stop sharing unless there's recognition. But a child who experiences the warmth of connection after sharing learns to value the act itself. He tells the story of a family that decided to stop giving their kids money for good grades. Instead, they talked together about what the kids found interesting in school and what felt challenging. Over time, the kids became more self-driven. They started caring less about straight A's and more about learning things that truly excited them. One of the parents said, "It was like watching the light come back into their eyes." Rewards and praise may produce well-behaved children, but not necessarily good-hearted ones. When children act from love, empathy, and curiosity, rather than external approval, they become more confident and compassionate human beings. He doesn't ask parents to be silent or emotionless. He simply reminds us that love doesn't need constant commentary to be felt. A quiet smile, a shared laugh, a simple, "I love you no matter what," says far more than 100 "good jobs." By the end of this chapter, the message is crystal clear: the best way to nurture a child's heart and mind is to focus less on evaluation and more on connection. Let love be the background music of your home, steady, gentle, and unconditional. And as Kohn transitions to the final part of the book, he begins to explore what this philosophy looks like as a whole way of life, how unconditional parenting changes not only the way we interact with our children, but the way we see ourselves, our communities, and the future of raising emotionally healthy kids in a world obsessed with performance. Chapter 8. This chapter feels like sitting with a wise friend at the end of a long, honest conversation, the kind where you suddenly realize that the real work of parenting isn't about managing behavior at all. It's about nurturing the heart. Kohn begins by reminding us why he wrote this book, because most parenting advice, even well-meaning advice, still focuses on control. It's all about getting kids to behave, to comply, to follow the rules. But in chasing good behavior, we often miss the deeper goal, raising good people. Children who think for themselves, who act with kindness even when no one's watching, who feel secure in the knowledge that they are loved completely, without needing to earn it. He asks a question that lingers: what kind of relationship do you want with your child 10 years from now? Most parents say they want their kids to trust them, to come to them when things are hard, to feel free to be honest. But that kind of relationship doesn't just appear. It's built slowly, in the small moments, in how we handle conflict, in how we listen, in whether we choose control or connection. In this chapter, Kohn invites us to imagine what family life could look like if unconditional love wasn't just a feeling, but a daily practice. A way of being. It would mean replacing punishment with problem solving, replacing lectures with listening, and replacing judgment with empathy. It would mean moving away from, how do I get my child to do what I want, toward, what does my child need, and how can I meet them there? A mother notices her teenage daughter becoming distant, snapping easily, spending more time alone. The old instinct kicks in, to lecture, to demand respect, to set stricter rules. But instead, remembering the principles of unconditional parenting, the mother pauses. She sits with her daughter and says, "You seem upset lately. I miss our talks. Can we figure out what's going on together?" The daughter hesitates, but slowly opens up about feeling overwhelmed and lonely at school. That conversation doesn't just fix the problem, it rebuilds connection. It reminds both parent and child that love is stronger than distance. Kohn explains that this is the real power of unconditional parenting. It turns potential battles into bridges. It helps children see that even when they fail, they are still worthy of love and belonging. And it helps parents rediscover the calm, compassionate presence that often gets lost in the noise of everyday stress. He also talks about something many parents secretly fear, losing control. When you parent without relying on rewards or punishments, it can feel uncertain, like letting go of the steering wheel. But Kohn reassures us that it's not about losing control, it's about shifting from controlling to guiding. It's about trusting the relationship more than the rulebook. Because in the end, the more we try to control our children, the less influence we actually have. Real influence comes from connection, not authority. He beautifully explains that children don't learn to make good choices by being controlled, they learn by being trusted. When they feel safe to talk about their mistakes, when they know love won't disappear when they mess up, they develop inner strength. They start to take responsibility, not because they're afraid, but because they care. One of the most touching ideas in this chapter is what Kohn calls, seeing the child before the behavior. Every tantrum, every defiant no, every slammed door, these are not signs of badness, they're signals. They tell us that something underneath needs attention, maybe fatigue, fear, or a feeling of not being understood. When we respond to that need, rather than react to the noise, we teach our children that emotions are not dangerous, that being human is not wrong. Kohn reminds parents that unconditional love doesn't mean ignoring behavior, it means interpreting it with compassion. Instead of thinking, my child is being difficult, we can think, my child is having a difficult moment. That small shift changes everything. It transforms frustration into empathy, and distance into parents who have embraced this mindset and seen remarkable changes. A once angry boy who became gentler once he felt truly heard. A perfectionist girl who began to relax once her parents stopped praising every achievement. A family that stopped using timeouts and discovered that calm conversations worked better than any punishment ever did. Kohn also reflects on the cultural forces that make unconditional parenting so radical. We live in a world that celebrates achievement, obedience, and productivity, not gentleness, empathy, or emotional intelligence. Parents are told to toughen their kids up, to prepare them for competition, to measure their success by grades and trophies. But Kohn argues that what children need most is not preparation for the rat race, but protection of their humanity. The best preparation for life is not pressure, but love. As he brings the book to a close, Kohn speaks directly to the heart of every parent who's ever doubted themselves. He acknowledges how hard it is, how exhausting it can be to stay patient, how natural it is to worry, to yell, to fall short. But he reminds us that unconditional parenting isn't about perfection. It's about repair. Every moment we lose our cool is a chance to model humility, to show that love always returns. Every time we say, "I'm sorry," we teach our children how to forgive. Every time we slow down and listen, we teach them that their voice matters. He ends with a simple truth that could serve as a quiet mantra for every parent: children don't need perfect parents. They need parents who see them, accept them, and love them without conditions. And in that truth lies the greatest gift of all, the chance to raise children who know, deep down, that they are enough. Not because of what they achieve, or how they behave, but simply because they are loved. As the final pages of this book close, it's hard not to feel a sense of peace, and perhaps a bit of longing. Peace because the message is liberating, you can stop performing as a parent and simply be present. And longing because it reminds us how rare unconditional love feels in a world that constantly demands more. But Kohn leaves us with hope, that by practicing this kind of parenting, we don't just change our homes, we change the world, one child at a time. A world where kindness isn't earned, but expected. Where love isn't conditional, but constant. So if you've ever found yourself exhausted by discipline charts, power struggles, and guilt, this book offers a new path, one that begins not with, how do I get my child to behave, but with, how can I make my child feel safe, seen, and loved? Because in the end, connection is the discipline, and love is the revolutionary heart of unconditional parenting. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this message touched your heart or reminded you of what really matters in parenting, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, we share warm, audiobook-style parenting reflections and summaries, gentle, insightful guides that help you raise not just well-behaved kids, but calm, confident, and deeply connected ones. So, if you'd love to keep learning and growing on this journey of mindful, heart-centered parenting, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's so much more we'll explore together. Because the truth is, parenting isn't about having all the answers. It's about walking beside your child, with patience, curiosity, and love that never has to be earned. Until next time, remember, less fear, more understanding. Less control, more connection. And above all, love without conditions.